Has he combed his hair differently? Mr. Brooks had indeed combed his hair, but that wasn't it. Suddenly, Joe figured it out. I know, he's smiling. Oh yeah, AJ realised. It's really creepy, isn't it? What's going on, Mr. Brooks? Said Joe. Mr. Brooks sighed impatiently. Oh no, not you two. I warn you, any mischief and you'll be for the high jump. Is the Prime Minister coming, sir? AJ asked, looking at the big black limo that had just pulled up behind the police motorcycles. Yes, it was supposed to be a secret, for security reasons, seeing as he's pretty much hated by most of the people these days. But some buffoon must have told the papers. I mean, look at all these cameras, he said, suddenly grinning and running a licked finger over one eyebrow. The doors of the black limo opened and out stepped a stout man in a mud-coloured suit. He had a red wobbly face in the middle of which sat a bulbous nose, like a cherry on a particularly disgusting trifle. The man dabbed his sweaty face with a hanky and attempted to flatten his wispy hair with a clammy hand. The man in question was Percival D. Duckholm. He was the Prime Minister of Great Britain, and it's fair to say one of the most disliked men in the land. He was the kind of man who would not only sell his grandmother for a quick buck, but he'd also try and sell your grandmother too. In fact, if you've got a moment, I suggest you give her a quick ring to tell her not to answer the door to any trifle-faced Prime Ministers. Percival D. T. Duckholm was also one of the rudest men you're ever likely to meet. He liked to shout at people. In fact, shouting was his most favourite thing in the world. He'd shout in the morning at breakfast to his poor wife and pale children. Then he'd have a bath and shout a bit in there. Then he'd get dressed and shout how he couldn't find his socks. Then he'd go to work and shout until lunch before it all got too much and he had to have a nap until it was home time. You may well say, surely he can't be this bad. Surely someone must like him. I mean, he did manage to be Prime Minister after all. Well, the simple truth is the man he was up against was even more loathsome. I know it's hard to believe, but let me tell you about Melvyn Thrick. A man so obnoxious that if you ever got to meet him, it would take all your strength not to vomit through your nose just to be in the same room as him. He had greasy hair, terrible breath and dandruff, so bad you'd think winter had come early by looking at the state of his shoulders. He picked his nose with eagerness and desperation of a man looking for loose change down the back of a sofa. When he spoke, he sounded like farts. He had the charm and manners of a drunk pig feeding at a trough. He hated pretty much anyone and everything, and he made no secret of trying to hide it. So it's not hard to see why he chose a career in politics. So there you have it. That's a very short story of Percival T. Duckholm's rise to power. He just happened to find an opponent that was even more repulsive than him. So anyway, where were we? Oh yes, Percival emerged from the car. He waved and smiled at the crowds, even though no one was cheering him. In fact, they were booing him. Joe looked round and saw quite a mob had gathered. The more Percival smiled, the more they shouted and wailed at him. "Resign, you lump," one angry lady yelled. "You're a crook," another one shouted. This just seemed to whip the reporters and cameramen into more of a frenzy. Percival T. Duckholm ignored the crowd and headed for Mr. Brooks. "What a marvellous school you have here," he said. "Thank you. Would you like to meet some of the children?" Mr. Brooks replied eagerly. "God, no, it's bad enough that I have to spend time with my own." Joe pushed his way to the front of the crowd. This was his chance. He figured that if he just explained about the park to the Prime Minister, he would fix it. I mean, that's what Prime Ministers do, isn't it? They fix things. Mr. Prime Minister, sir, can I ask you a question?" Joe asked timidly. "Ew," the Prime Minister shrieked. "Get away from me, you horrible creature." "I just wanted to ask you a question. It's about our park." "You just wanted to fart a question about a park?" the Prime Minister asked. "Speak up, boy." "No, I wanted to ask a question about the park. Our park has been closed down and they are going to build a shiny tower on it." By now, everyone was listening. Even Mr. Brooks was staring at Joe, a mixture of bewilderment and anger on his face. Mostly anger. Maybe 5% bewilderment. Joe wasn't used to people actually listening to him. He normally liked to sit quietly and let AJ take the lead, but he knew this could be his only chance to save his mum's job. "Ah," the Prime Minister said, smiling. "At last, a sensible question. Yes, it's true. We've closed down the grotty old park to build a shiny new tower. That's what the government is all about, building shiny new things. No need to thank me, Sonny Jim." And the PM gave Joe a toothy grin, ruffled his hair and walked away. "What an idiot," AJ said, looking at the Prime Minister. "Hey, Joe, are you all right?" But Joe wasn't all right. He was about a zillion miles from all right. His blood was hot and full of anger. How could someone so important be so useless? He felt like a fly that had just been swatted to the floor. The Prime Minister moved on, surrounded by reporters and cameramen. They were like a pack of animals feeding on every word that fell out of his greasy mouth. Charlie James, World News Today. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Anything at all about the allegations that you're a crook and a thief? No comment, Percival bellowed like a foghorn in storm. Foghorn in storm, not a frog. Do we take it from your silence that crimes they accuse you are true, Prime Minister? Now listen here, you horrible little man. Are insults the best you can do, Prime Minister? Charlie asked, shoving the microphone right into the Prime Minister's face. Percival T. Duckcombe, clearly having had enough of being pestered, stopped in his tracks, whipped round to face the reporter. I know in recent days there have been several accusations about me in the newspapers. Well, I'd like to say once and for all, I deny any wrongdoing. I can assure you that the huge amount of money the police found in my bank account was simply resting there until I had time to give it to the home for orphan kittens. Furthermore, I can assure you that it was a genuine mix-up when I accidentally sold my grandmother to the travelling circus. I would also like to deny that it was me caught on camera giving bags of cash to those dodgy businessmen. It was in fact my twin brother that I only just discovered I had last week. Now, go away! The sound of jeering and booing rose a level. The Prime Minister's pink sweat-glazed face was getting more and more irate looking with every passing moment. What about the Deputy Prime Minister, Violetta Crump? Do you stand by her? The news reporter asked. But before the Prime Minister had a chance to answer, another voice interrupted. Let me answer that. Out of the car stepped a woman dressed from head to toe in black. Her painted nails flashed in the sunlight like knives at the ends of her hands. This was Violetta Crump, the Deputy Prime Minister. She was a chilling woman with brains as sharp as a pot of pencils dipped in lemon juice. She had a steely look on her face that made everyone feel puny and unimportant, and her eyes were sly like a snake's. The angry people were now looking nervously at their feet, quivering. Do you still support the Prime Minister, Mrs. Crump? Charlie James asked, his voice wobbling with fright. The Prime Minister and I may go back a long way. He's like family to me, and one I like, not one I'd sell to a circus. Percival laughed nervously. There have been many accusations about the Prime Minister in the last few days, but I don't know why anyone would think it was me who told the papers about the Prime Minister's crimes. I'm sorry, his alleged crimes. All this talk that I'm after his job is just that, talk. Why would I want Percy's job? His big house, his power? Oh no, I'm just happy to work for such a special man. Violetta looked at Percival T. Duckcombe if he were a slug stuck on his shoe. Well, there you have it. Violetta thinks I'm brilliant. I think I'm brilliant. Now let's put this silly matter to rest. I'm in charge of you lot, and there's not a single thing you can do about it. Oh, will you shut up, you bumbling great warthog, came a small voice from the crowd. Mr. Brooks looked round, Charlie James looked round, Violetta looked round, AJ looked round, and there stood Joe, his arms folded crossly, staring at Percival T. Duckcombe. There was a deathly hush.